Hi, everyone. Welcome to New York Energy Week 2023. We are thrilled to welcome you to the most dynamic and influential energy happening of the year. New York Energy Week by EnerKnol, hosted here virtually on the One Business World platform, brings together visionaries, experts, and industry leaders from around the globe to explore innovative solutions and shape the future of the energy landscape. Welcoming all to New York Energy Week 2023, where minds meet, ideas ignite, and the energy revolution begins. So it's with great pleasure now, I'd love to introduce everyone to Roberta Boscolo. She is the Climate and Energy Lead for the WMO, and she is joining us this afternoon from Geneva, Switzerland. And Roberta's topic is going to be climate change and the impact on the energy system. Roberta, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Welcome.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. So this is the title of my presentation. And this second slide really is the figure from a recently IPCC synthesis report. And I like to put this slide as a first figure because it delivers the three main messages that I would like to convey today in my presentation. And so the three messages is first, the global warming is happening and accelerating. Each of the bar represent an increment of temperature with respect to a reference temperature that is the average between 1859 and 900, and we consider it as the temperature of the pre-industrial era. And we know that we, the humanity, are the cause of this warming. Is our human activity, the increase of greenhouse gases emission that trap the heat in the Earth system and make the global warming increase of the temperature. And this is due to burning of fossil fuel, deforestation, land use, agriculture practices, waste management, and many more. And the third message is really the future depends on our action of today. And it depends on us. Here we have 5 scenarios, which depends on the emission of our ambition targets in the future. Very low emissions means that we are able to stabilize the increase of temperature, or the very high emission scenarios where most probably our planet, a lot of part in our climate and our planet won't be actually habitable. And this is also, it shows also that the climate change is a global and intergenerational problem. A newborn today, someone who is not responsible for the greenhouse gas emissions of the past, is going to experience more heat and more climate change impacts in the future, in his or her life, rather than somebody who was born in the 50s or in the 80s. So this is my content of my presentation, and I'll start looking at the climate, the status of the climate today and the impacts and risks. So, but before I do that, I just want to say a few words about the World Meteorological Organization, and this is the organization where I work. This is a specialized agency of the United Nations and is the authoritative voice of weather, water, and climate. The headquarters is in Geneva, in Switzerland, where I'm actually connected today. It has 195 member states and territories, and coordinate the meteorological observations, exchange of data and technologies, because the atmosphere and the meteorological phenomena have no boundary. So we need cooperation and collaboration among all the countries. In terms of a strategic plan of WMO for the 2020 and 2030, so for the next decade, WMO vision is that by 2030, we see a world where all nations, especially the most vulnerable, are more resilient to the impact of extreme weather, climate, and water events and other environmental events. The key driver for this strategy is really an unprecedented demand for actionable, accessible, and authoritative science-based information. We strive to better serve societal needs, delivering authoritative and accessible, user-oriented, and fit-for-purpose information and services through the enhanced capacity of countries to develop these environmental-related services, also impact-based services to better support the policy making and action that implement sustainable development and mitigate the weather, climate, and water-related risks. So more than 10 years ago, WMO launched what we call it the Global Framework for Climate Services, which provide a unique platform for guiding and supporting activities across the value chain for climate services. And these services contribute to and support adaptation, mitigation, and reduction of loss and damage. Availability and the access of products will be expanded and broadened to benefit all the countries. So the development, for example, and application of climate services is based on the value chain or better a value cycle really that goes from observation network to provision and application of climate services for user and decision and actions. And this value chain of WMO, in this value chain, WMO is responsible for a climate services information system, which is the information about the climate, the past, the present, and the future, how this information or data are archived, analyzed, modeled, and exchanged, and also processed. And WMO delivers authoritative climate information products through operational mechanism, technical standards, communication, and also authentication. So WMO helps members to monitor the Earth climate and the global and regional at the global and regional scale. And that is reliable information is available through evidence-based decision-making and how to best adapt to changing climate and manage risk associated with climate variability and extreme. So these are products that WMO publishes, these reports. And this week, actually last week, we launched the European State of Climate in 2022. This state of climate, this monitoring information of the state of the climate are based on climate indicators. And we have generally looking at 7 indicators for the climate monitoring. All these indicator has to be relevant, which means they are relevant to a range of audiences and sectors, and can be expressed in one single number. They represent a picture of a broad range of changes that we are looking at in the Earth system. They are also indicators that are calculated using the international agreed methods, and also the data are verified by several groups around the world and experts. Also, each indicator is calculated regularly at least at annual frequency, with a minimum possible time between the publication, if they are annual publications, so the yearly measurements is required. And also these indicators are available, the data are available for calculation, and also they has to be robust, reliable, and also valid. So these are the 7 indicators, and here is some highlights that I would like to do for the latest report that we published, which is in 2022. So what we can see here is the global mean temperature in 2022 is estimated as an increment of 1.15 degree above the pre-industrial level. As I said before, the period which goes, an average which goes between 1850 and 900. Important to say that the past 8 years from 2015 to 2022 are the 8 warmest year in record. And 2022 is the 5th warmest year. We had La Niña condition that continued with a very short interruption in 2020, and are expected also, they continue in 2022. But after 3 consecutive years of La Niña, we are now starting in this year to see El Niño coming back and developing. But 2022 was actually a year of La Niña, so in general, a colder year. Sea level continued to rise in 2022 and reach also a new record high. Actually, important to say that since January 2022, the global mean sea level has risen by nearly 10 millimeters, and approximately 10% of the overall rise in sea level since the satellite measurements began in 1993. We also know that the ocean absorbs 90% of the excess of the heat in the Earth's system, which is caused by the emission of greenhouse gases. And the upper 2,000 meters of the ocean has continued to warm and reaching always the high record. The data set says that the heat content has actually accelerated in the past 2 decades. The sea ice extent in the Arctic also was below average in most of the year. Antarctic sea ice was a low record, had a low record in 2022. And also the Greenland ice sheets had negative total mass. Actually, they are having negative total mass for the last 26 years. And so we had an event of raining at the highest point of Greenland, which is at 3,200 meters. That was last year in September. And also we had a very low winter snowpack in 2021 and 2022. and a very high temperature during summer in 2022, and that's resulted in a decrease of 6% of the volume of glacier, for example, in Switzerland. We had record hot and dry condition in Europe, in North Africa, and in China, especially during summer. China had the hottest summer on record, and UK actually exceeded 4 degrees for the first time since we have observation in UK. We also had a record-breaking rain in July and August that led to extensive flooding in Pakistan. And we had 1,700 deaths and also 33 million people affected by this extreme event. Also in the Southern Africa region has been battered by several series of cyclones over 2 months, and also leading to a surge of a need for protection and shelter for hundreds of thousands of people that have been affected. We had droughts in East Africa, where the rainfall had been below average for 4 consecutive wet seasons, and is the longest sequence of 40 years with drought. And the region, of course, has been affected. Millions of people has been affected for food crisis and also food insecurity. So we can see that climate change really can be seen as an amplifier of extreme of crisis, like food crisis and floodings, and displacing many people, especially in the most vulnerable and poor area of the planet. So what is the cause of all these changes that we are experiencing? We know that atmospheric concentration of the greenhouse gases reflect a balance between emission from human activities, natural sources, and sinks in the biosphere and the ocean. Increasing this level of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere due to human activity are the major driver of this climate change. And this is clear since the Industrial Revolution. The concentration of in the atmosphere are data that WMO collects around the globe through a program called the Global Atmosphere Watch. And we can see that every year the concentration of the greenhouse gases is increasing. Carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide reach always a record level, and they are increasing respectively 150%, 262%, and 124% with respect to the pre-industrial level. So CO2 emissions are caused by coal, oil, and fossil gas and deforestation. Methane is driven up by gas leakages and ruminant farming, and are the major contribution to the greenhouse gas effect. So it's worth saying that globally, we have 10% of the people emit 40% of the world greenhouse gases, while the poorest 50% are responsible for less than 15% of the emissions. and generally they are also the most vulnerable to climate impacts. So temperature, as I said before, is the main indicator. As I said, the global mean temperature in 2022 was estimated as 1.15 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial level. And also I said before that the past 8 years were the warmest on record. The current warming is unprecedented, at least for the latest 2,000 years. And of course, from year to year, and sometimes from decade to decade, there is natural variability that modulates these human-induced trends. Warming is particularly strong in the Arctic and more pronounced in other continents. For example, we can see that the warming is increasing with time and also in every region, but some regions are warmer faster than other regions. Especially Europe is warming at a pace which is twice as the rest of the planet, or actually twice the rest of on average. I would say that every decade has been successively warmer than the previous one, since we have records of data which goes back to 1850. And other indicators for this of this climate change, and which is not only temperature, but also, for example, heating degree days, especially in US, they have declined, particularly in the recent years, as the climate actually is, as the planet is warming. And this change suggests that, for example, heating needs are decreasing overall. And also, again, in US, the cooling degree days have increased in the past 100 years. And the increase is actually more marked in the last few decades. And suggesting again that air conditioning and energy demand for air conditioning is going to increase, has been increasing and is going to increase in the future. Then we have a relative humidity average over the all land areas has generally decreased over the last 40 years and has remained around a lower level since 2000. This is an observed drying, which is not associated with a reduction of precipitation, but more on really evaporation and increase of a lot of evaporation due to the high temperature. And also in 2022, the world ocean, as the ocean heat content were again the hottest in the historical record and exceed also the previous record in 2021. Almost the 7 regions, the 4 basins recorded the really highest ocean heat content since 1950. So while it is difficult to identify the exact cause of the extreme event, there is a new science that tries to attribute and quantify the role of climate change in altering the probability and the magnitude of some types of weather and climate extremes. And there is a strong evidence that characteristics of the many individual extreme events have already changed because of the human-driven changes in the climate system. Some types of highly impactful extreme weather events have occurred more often and have become more severe due to these human influences. And this is a sign that the climate change is causing these changes because they are more generalized in terms of hazards and also in terms of geographical coverage. As the climate is warming, continues to warm, the observed changes in the probability and in the magnitude of some extreme weather events will continue and will be affected by the human activities. So human-driven climate change can alter the regional characteristic of climate hazards by changing the magnitude, the intensity, and of the climate hazards, the frequency for which it is the occurrence of these events, the duration also of this hazardous condition, the persistence of this hazardous condition, and also the timing when the hazards starts. As well as the spatial extent and that is threatened by these hazards. And we see that frequency and intensity of extreme events at the global, they are increasing, also looking at the global disasters, as they are also increasing due to more and more exposed and vulnerability to climate change. So global natural disaster in 2022 resulted in an average economic losses of 313 billion, according to analysis of Aon. Half of those losses occurred actually in the United States, driven by the devastating effect of the Hurricane Ian, and also multiple and severe convective storm outbreaks. 3 global droughts events were among the 10 costliest disasters, which underline the growing significance of these events at the global scale. This occurred in the United States, in Europe, and also in China. The insurance sector covered 132 billion, marking 2022 as the 5th costliest year for insurance on record. And the industry also saw the 2nd costlier event on record, which was Hurricane Ian, that resulted in approximately 50 to 55 billions of insured losses covered by the public and private entities. And so many disasters in highly exposed area, including also the Hurricane Ian or other devastating floods in Pakistan, highlights the needs to strengthen resilience as a socioeconomic change and concentration of exposure and wealth in vulnerable areas remain a major loss driver. So every ton of CO2 emission contributes to global warming. And when global CO2 emission reach net zero level, means that there is not going to be additional warming due to the greenhouse gases. And because the major risks are associated with global warming, all the countries in the world have committed themselves to this Paris Agreement, which is limiting the global warming to well below 2 degrees and with an aspiration to limit to 1.5 degrees. And the room of maneuver to limit the temperature to 1.5 degrees is really correspond in terms of CO2 budget to 500 billion tons of CO2, which if we compare it with the scale of the annual emission, which is around 40 billion tons, means that the scenarios to limit we have very little years. We have probably less than a decade to reach and implement the Paris Agreement, and to limit, therefore, the risk of climate change. So the continuation of the current policy, we know that the policy are in place, but they are not sufficient. And that with the current policy in place, we will exceed 2 degrees by 2050. And the range of climate response would be more like around 2.5 or 3.5 degrees. So immediate action actually is needed to really limit the temperature and to reach the scenarios, which in this graphic is the blue scenarios, where we limit the temperature to below 2 degrees and close to 1.5 degrees. The more we shock the climate, and therefore, especially if we go beyond 1 degrees and also beyond 2 degrees, the more uncertain the situation becomes, and as well as also the natural carbon sinks, which are ocean and vegetation, lose their effectiveness to actually absorb the excess of greenhouse gases. So today, the choices of today's and the future emission will determine the level of the warming in the future. And many changes in the climate system and also in each region are amplified in direct relation to each additional increment of warming, like the sea level rise. If we, for example, peak the temperature, we are able to peak the temperature at 2 degrees, the rise in the sea level would be 0.5 meter towards the end of this century. But of course, because the heat absorption is already locked in the oceans and in the seas, this level of rising will continue and will probably reach 2 or 6 meters from now for the next 2,000 years. So sea level rise, for example, is a long legacy for the future generation. As I said before, with every additional increment of global warming, changes in extreme continues and become larger. And for example, every additional 0.5 degrees of global warming causes clearly increases in the intensity, in the frequency, and in hot extremes. And I'm going to go faster here because the time is running. And just say that the power sectors is not immune to the climate impacts. We saw extreme heat events in Argentina in 2022 that led massive power outages, affecting also 700,000 people. In Malawi, tropical storm Ana caused heavy rain and flooding, but also damaged hydropower in Capicira, reducing the country capacity of 30%. And also in Australia, bushfire in Australia burned hectares, millions of hectares of land, but also the electricity network has been hit hard with key power infrastructure impacted by fires across the East Coast, and causing also power outages for tens of thousands of homes. Further increase, of course, in global sea level will threat the nuclear power located in the northeast coast of USA, and in Florida, as well as many in Japan and in Korea. I would see increases of sea level above 50 centimeters compared to the current level. So physical protection for nuclear site should be thought and upgraded in response to this steady increase of sea level rise. In 2020, for example, 80% of the electricity generated globally, includes nuclear, thermal, and hydropower, depended on water availability, and heat wave and droughts associated with climate change are a major hazard for the energy system. And the impact of more frequent and intense extreme weather, water, and climate event is already clear, as we can see in these figures. According to the International Energy Agency and also the International Agency, Atomic Energy Agencies, we have 33% of thermal power plants that are rely on fresh water availability for cooling that are located in high water stress area. And also existing nuclear power plants are expected to be stressed by these water shortages, and also the increase in temperature of water, which is important for cooling a reactor. And here in 2022, for example, in Europe was a very dry year, and according to the data that was provided, we had a very low generation of run-of-the-river plants, and also similar situation for the reservoirs, especially in Norway, in Spain, and in Portugal. And such situation actually poses a stress in the hydropower generation, especially for satisfying the growing demand for electricity due to the heat wave. For example, here in the Italian hydropower generation suffered strongly during summer due to the drought, especially in the northern part of the country. And also, maybe I can skip this, but in February 2021, we had this very cold wave, an extreme event in Texas that brought a record temperature and cold temperature. And at the peak of this event, 5 million people in Texas were without power, and for more than 3 days. And this resulted in very high prices for electricity, and also affecting disproportionately lower income and minority population. So the supply chain of electric system is highly vulnerable to various climate impacts, and it is important that we start to build resilience to the energy system, and this kind of actions we actually bring more benefit than cost. A climate resilient energy system that can anticipate, absorb, accommodate, and recover from climate hazard could prevent negative effect of climate change and from spreading them across all the energy value chain. And here I conclude by saying that we can capture these benefits in the range of actions. This is the latest report from the International Energy Agency, and all stakeholders can have a role in this. The energy suppliers, operators, transmission can play a role in improving resilience across all 4 dimensions of the readiness, robustness, resourcefulness, and recovery. energy authorities, including government, subnational government, a regulator, can ensure readiness by providing information and data for customer and conducting also risk assessment and establishing enabling policy for market, and also energy consumer can contribute to the energy sector resilience by adopting demand side measure as a main end user sector. So I conclude here by saying time is act and every decision counts. Thank you.
Roberta, nice job. That wonderful presentation. Thanks for being our noon speaker here. Hey, couple of quick thoughts just on my side, and I'll keep an eye on here on the Q&A. Big picture wise, you had some really critical points there. The intergenerational problem is sometimes you don't think of that. You think of people that are they're born today. And you think of really what they've inherited and what they have looking forward to, and how to act along those lines. That struck me as very important. The fact that you've got children being born today, that you're inheriting so much. The economic policy part as well, I thought is really critical. And when you think about looking forward and trying to tackle these types of problems and a level of health equity and income equity amongst some of our poorest people here in the world, I think incredibly important. He also had down on an earlier slide too, food insecurity, and I thought that was, from a big picture policy standpoint, something. And I know the UN is always, if you think of the SDGs and the like, they're always focusing on that as well. And then from a finance standpoint too, you think of just the insurance costs, right, and the property damage and the like that comes from it. When you had one stat as well, and almost every region really was increasing since 1900. Asia was a big jump, but Europe you had down as almost two times as a jump. Do you think a lot of that has to do with industrialization? Population growth? What do you think from just an overall growth standpoint? Too many people? What do you think?
Well, sure. I mean, if we look at the risk of climate, we can have, these are the three elements: the elements of the hazards, and this is actually, if we want to reduce the severity of the hazards, we need to go through mitigation. But then we have the exposure and the vulnerability. So exposure, exactly. I mean, where we build, where we have our assets, and also, maybe in the past they were not such an exposure, but the climate is changed, and the future risks are not the risk of the past. And also vulnerability, of course. I mean, vulnerability means increase the resilience is an important action, and we are more and more vulnerable because, again, the climate is changed. Our vulnerability is a changing vulnerability as a change in exposure. So we need to look at the future to be able to prevent and to adapt and prevent losses and damage.
No, for sure. I mean, everyone needs to be watchful, and thank you for your section on the power sector as well. The vulnerability of that particular part of our world and economy too. You can't take that for granted at all, for sure. Well, Roberta, thank you for joining New York Energy Week here. Thanks for kicking off our virtual sessions this afternoon. What wonderful job! Congratulations on all your great work at the WMO. Really appreciate it. And everybody, Roberta Boscolo joining us today from Geneva. Really appreciated your presentation. Excellent job.
Thank you for listening.
All right. Take good care. Have a nice rest of the day. Thank you, Roberta.
Bye.
Bye.